Hello, everyone. This week is going to be really special because this is one of the books that I grew up reading. It's fairly new. It was published around 2016, I think. I'm not going to look at the details right now. But this was a book series that I discovered around my freshman year of high school. And this is a lot like, if you've read it, this is a lot like Percy Jackson, but with Latin American and Hispanic myths. And it's really, really interesting. And the author actually sent me a signed copy of the second book because me and my family liked it so much, and it's just so super good. I would definitely recommend this if you're a fan of Percy Jackson, the Kane Chronicles, anything like Artemis Fowl, anything like that. It's just really, really interesting, and Calejo really does wonders with the narrative of this story, and it's just awesome. I love it. Anyway, I'm going to read you the blurb. Charlie Hernandez grew up listening to his grandmother telling him stories from Latino and Hispanic mythology. Sometimes she'd draw pictures of the monsters from the tales for him to identify. Charlie thought it was all a game. But he should have known better. Charlie's abuela hated party games. Now his entire world has turned upside down. A fire destroyed his house, and his parents have disappeared. Now Charlie is living with a temporary guardian while the police continue to look for his mom and dad. On top of that, he's grown horns. Yes, real honest to goodness horns. Then the feathers appear, feathers growing out of his pores, covering his arms and chest, and suddenly he's reminded of one of his abuela's myths. This one was called about a creature called a morphling, a shapeshifter. But myths aren't real, are they? As Charlie and his longtime crush Violet Ray set out to search for the truth, they realize that some monsters aren't hiding under the bed. They're hiding in plain sight. Now, I'm going to get ready to read you the first pages. Chapter 1. Myths, my abuela used to say, are truths long forgotten by the world. Which is probably why she collected them the way some people collect stamps, or mugs with pictures of kittens on them. She gathered tales of enormous, horned, snake-like sea creatures, of two-headed vampire dogs with glowing red eyes, of terrifying man-eating ghouls that stalk the night, searching for naughty children to kidnap. The myths came from all over Spanish-speaking world, from Madrid to Quito, Mexico City to Buenos Aires. Most of them were hundreds of years old, almost as old as the cultures that had inspired them. Some had spread quickly around the globe, spreading like wildfire. Others never even left their tiny rural towns where they'd first been told. All her life, my grandma had been obsessed with Hispanic mythology, with all the legends and stories and folklore, and had spent years teaching them to me. When I was little, we used to hang out in the kitchen on lazy Saturday afternoons, me in my Power Rangers PJs and chancletas. My pronunciation is going to be very bad. I am sorry. My abuela telling her favorite tales from memory, making the epic battles and ghoulish monsters come to life with every gesture of her brown and wrinkled hands. Afterward, she would quiz me on what I'd heard. We played this little game, sort of like Pictionary, where she'd draw a quick sketch of one of the characters, and I would have to guess who, or in most cases, what, it was. If I got 4 in a row, she'd let me eat leche condensada right out of the can, which might have been the only thing I enjoyed more than listening to her stories. At the time, I thought it was all just for fun, a cool little game between the two of us. But I should have known better. My abuela hated party games. Chapter 2. I still remember the first night in the police station like it was yesterday. The tall sheriff's deputy telling me everything was going to be okay, that there was nothing for me to worry about, that they'd find my parents, promising me that. Then he handed me a chewed-up number 2 pencil, dropped a yellow notepad on the desk in front of me, and told me to write down everything I remembered. Told me not to leave anything out, not even what I was feeling. I'm not sure which was more embarrassing, the fact that I could barely hold the pencil in my sweaty, trembling hands, or that I didn't have anything to write. See, I wasn't there the morning my parents went missing. I was at the local guitar shop, and I wasn't there later that afternoon when our house burned down. I'd biked over to Zoo Miami for the day. So 45 minutes later, I'd gotten down only 2 words, but they were the truest words I'd ever written. I'm scared. So scared I could barely breathe. So scared I could actually feel the blood pulsing through my hands and feet. But I didn't write any of that down. Instead, I sat frozen in the small interrogation room, with tears running from my cheeks, waiting for the deputy to come back, waiting to wake up from this horrible nightmare. And that was when the pain came. It felt like 2 little bee stings up near my temples, hot and sharp, but lasting only for a moment. I remember running my hands through my hair and feeling something strange. I remember getting up and walking to the tiny half bathroom at the end of the hall for a closer look. I even remember the small, squeaky sounds my sneakers made on the scuffed and dirty tiles. But what I remember most was the pair of stubby horns I discovered growing out of the sides of my head. They were a dark golden color, like honey mixed with dirt. Chapter 3. That day was the single worst day of my life. But the days that followed were almost as bad. Since I didn't have any living relatives, my abuela died when I was 9, and Child Services was having a hard time finding a place for me, I spent the next 2 weeks sleeping on a scratchy cot in one of the empty cells at the front of the police station. Every night, I planted myself in the folding chair outside the station's 911 call center, listening in on the dispatchers, hoping to hear something, anything about my parents. And every night I was disappointed. Obviously, with a pair of horns growing out of my head, I couldn't help but think back to my abuela's myths, especially the one about the morphling. In those stories, the young hero would always defeat his nemesis, an evil, narcissistic, twice-cursed witch, by manifesting some kind of animal trait. It was usually something odd, like fins or hooves or an armadillo shell, and even then it seemed sort of similar to what was happening to me. Minus the whole fighting an evil witch part, of course. I honestly didn't see how a fairy tale could have anything to do with my current situation. They were just made-up stories, kid stuff. Then, about a week later, the horns suddenly vanished. I couldn't explain it. I just woke up one morning, felt around underneath my hoodie, and they were gone. At that point, I just assumed, like most people probably would, that I had some sort of nervous breakdown, my terrified mind frantically mixing reality with fiction, trying to bring me back to a time when I felt safe, back to a time when I was surrounded by people who loved me and cared for me, and would never let anything bad happen to me. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. That is, until the unthinkable happened. Again. Chapter 4. This time, it happened in the worst place imaginable. Middle school. Ponce de Leon Middle, to be exact. And just like the first time, I was caught completely off guard. See, by then, my life has almost started to feel normal again. More than 4 weeks had passed since the horns had come. Since the horns, school was starting back up, and my 2 best friends had come home from summer camp. Not only that, but I wasn't sleeping at the police station anymore. The state had found me a temporary guardian who lived in the same South Florida neighborhood, and I'd moved into her dusty upstairs attic. Not perfect, sure, but it definitely beat the heck out of a crummy 6x8 cinderblock cell. So, anyway, there I was, just sort of dozing off in a third period history, when my life took another crazy detour into Freaksville. Unlike the horns, this particular manifestation started with an itch. A hot, sort of painful itch way down on my back. Then the itch began to spread, up my sides, along my shoulders, down the backs of my arms. It felt as if an army of creeping bugs were crawling all over me. I started to scratch and scratch, but it didn't help. The itching only got worse, my skin growing hotter and redder and ridiculously flaky. And that's when it happened. That's when a fat gray feather burst through the skin of my forearm like a zombie hand busting out of a grave. For half a second, I wondered if Mr. Henry's snooze-inducing lesson about the French Revolution was somehow making me hallucinate, which, by the way, wouldn't have been the first time. But then another feather sprang up, this one through a tiny pore in the crook of my left arm, and I felt my blood turn to ice. "Dios mío!" I screamed on the inside. "Not again!" Jumping to my feet, I raced for the door, snatching the big red hall pass from the pegboard on my way out. Behind me, I heard Mr. Henry shout, "Hey, Charlie, where are you going?" But I didn't stop. Didn't even look back. Thankfully, the hallway was empty. No eighth graders making out by the stairs. No hall monitors lurking with their bright yellow t-shirts and walkie-talkies. I pounded past the wall of walkers, and around the corner, through the heavy metal door next to shop class, my breaths coming fast and shallow, then up a short flight of stairs and into the boys' bathroom, which thankfully was also empty. I ducked into the first stall, peeled off my shirt, and gasped. My chest, smooth and hairless as a baby's bottom a minute ago, was now covered in a forest of ugly little feathers. I didn't think. I just started plucking. And the first thing I learned, ripping feathers out of your body isn't any fun. It's actually insanely painful. Sort of like tweezing your eyebrows, except those eyebrows were as long as my pinky finger and had hard keratin roots that sank deep into my pores, deeper than any hair follicle. My skin stung. Tears ran down my cheeks, and I had to bite down on my tongue just to keep from screaming, but I didn't stop. In fact, I started plucking even faster, squeezing my eyes shut against the tiny stings of pain and tossing the feathers into the toilet by the handful. Rip, wince, toss. Rip, wince, toss. I almost sort of started to get in a rhythm, too, when I opened my eyes again and saw something that made my heart stop. The toilet bowl was full of feathers, almost to the rim of the seat, but my body was still covered with them, which could mean only one thing. They were regrowing faster than I could pluck them. "No!" I screamed. "No, no, 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 no!" My mind was reeling, and I didn't know what to do. I tried flushing the toilet, but nothing happened. I tried again, jiggling the handle this time, but instead of the feathers disappearing down the hole like they were supposed to, water filled the bowl and an unhealthy gurgling sound rose from the bottom. I froze for an instant, froze with horror, watching as the water rose up and up and up and began to spill over the sides of the bowl and onto the floor. The gurgling sounds turned into choking ones. The sharp stench of number one and its even stinkier numerical compadre stung my nostrils. "Do something!" In a panic, I peeked into the toilet, trying to see if there was anything I could do to help me get the freaking thing to flush. Huge mistake. Because just at that moment a fountain of whiz-scented nasty sprayed up straight up from the center of the bowl, blasting me in the face and knocking me off balance. I crashed through the stall door and landed on the floor with a wet splash. My breath exploded from my lungs in a painful whoosh. The world teetered. My head spun. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, the choking gurgling sound spread to the other toilets, and suddenly all 5 fudge funnels were overflowing. The urinals, too! For a crazy second, I thought about trying to clean this mess up, maybe spreading some paper towels over the floor to soak up the water. But then I realized there weren't enough paper towels in the dispenser. There weren't even enough towels in the entire school! Scrambling to my feet, I ran to the bathroom door, cracked it open enough for one eye, and peered out. The hall was still empty, which was awesome. But how much longer would it stay that way? There couldn't have been much more than 15 minutes left of class when I'd Speedy Gonzales it out of there, and I had no idea how much time had passed. Doesn't matter, I told myself. Either way, I had to get out of here. Either way, I had to find something to cover up the feathers. Unfortunately, I couldn't think of only one place to look. So, that is going to be the end for today. I read up until chapter 5, and this is the kind of book where there are short chapters, so you don't have to worry about reading like an enormously long chapter all at once and getting stuck. That's another great thing about this book that I liked when I was younger. But as I said, this it's not just focusing on him being the Morphling. It's also like other myths and stuff like La Llorona, other things too, but that's the only thing I can think of right now. But it's really interesting, and they go all over the world. It's great. And I really recommend this to anybody who liked the works of Rick Riordan, or like, I guess people who write myth stories. If you are interested in Greek mythology, Egyptian mythology, Chinese mythology, Norse mythology, anything like that. So yeah, I definitely recommend this book to anybody. And I'm going to see you next week. Goodbye!